welcome everybody to today's webinar about building resilient charities to support Australia's wellbeing. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. We're really excited to share this work with you. Some of you may be familiar with the work that SVA and Social Ventures Australia, that is, and the Centre for Social Impact have been doing together over the past year or so about the future of charities in the wake of COVID-19. This is the fourth report in our series. We would certainly, the work we're presenting today is the fourth report in the series. We will not obviously have time to go into all the findings we have from all of those reports, but we'd certainly encourage you to go and have a look at them and see some of the detail there, and we'll be posting the links to some of that work in the chat as we go. You can also find it on both SVA and SI's website. We've got an incredible panel of sector leaders here to speak to you today, and I won't go through their bios in detail because you're more interested in hearing from them than from me, but I would very much like to welcome Kristy Muir, who's the CEO of the Centre for Social Impact, Suzie Riddell, who is the CEO of Social Ventures Australia, Donna Zwart, who is the CEO of Fitted for Work, who has joined us today to be able to share some experiences of what it was like to be running a frontline service delivery charity during the pandemic and how that's affected their organisation as a result. And we're also very fortunate to be joined by Marcia Scott, who's also with Fitted for Work, to talk about her experiences as someone who was helped by the services of the organisation and now works for them. So that's really exciting. Please, we will leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, and I would encourage you to start sending through your questions now. So that we can pick them up as soon as possible. Best way to do questions is to post them in the chat, and we will pick those up, and I'll pass them on to our panellists. I think that is all of the intro I needed to do. So at this point, I would like to throw you to Kristy to kick things off.
Thanks so much, Cassie, and hello everybody. Lovely to see your smiling faces again. It's nice that we can be on Zoom because we get people from all around the country, but it's a shame that we're not all out of our houses in this scenario. Let me start off also by acknowledging that I'm on Dharawal speaking country and pay my respects to elders past and present, and to the elders and ancestors on the lands that you're on. Really great to see all of the chat locations in terms of the countries you're sitting on. And let me also respectfully acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be watching this webinar. Many of you who are here know the issues the sector's been facing. You've felt them, you've dealt with them, you've lost sleep over them, you've balanced them with compassion and agility and hard work and persistence and innovation, and I'm sure a fair amount of stress. So you're certainly not alone. My job is to give you 5 big issues that have been facing the for-purpose sector before and during COVID. And like Cassie said, if you want more detail, you can read a whole lot of the stats in the 4 preceding reports. But let's start with number 1. We all know we had a serious inequity problem before COVID. Despite almost 3 decades of economic growth, Australia's social progress was really poor. Our social progress index demonstrated that in many areas we were not meeting basic human needs, we were not enhancing quality of life, and we were not creating the conditions for all people to meet their full potential. But we did have progress. It wasn't fast, or it wasn't fast enough. Number 2, the for-purpose sector has long been stuck in this loop of inquiry, reform and recommendation. And that loop was long before COVID. Pop quiz, since 1902, how many Royal Commissions has Australia had on various issues in Australia? I can't throw lollies at you as prizes via Zoom, but if anyone knows that answer, I'll be impressed. Thanks, Mike. I've just seen you throw a number out. We've actually had, since 1902 and Royal Commissions started in Australia, we've actually had 137 Royal Commissions. And yet what we haven't necessarily seen is shift in outcomes, policies, processes or structures in relation to what those Royal Commissions were necessarily about. We can take, for example, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. That did not prevent the next 493 deaths. And I could pull out other individual examples, but for the sake of this webinar, let's take the reviews that have been done on the third sector. So last year, CSI reviewed 92 different Royal Commissions, Senate inquiries, and other types of reviews since that major report that the Productivity Commission did in 2010. And over the last decade, 4 themes have consistently emerged that have been stuck in this inquiry recommendation reform loop. Issues around competition and contestability, issues around joined up and integrated working, issues around workforce reform, and issues around government constantly holding that stewarding role. And I won't go into the detail of those, and you can download the report. I'm sure my colleagues will click the link up for those of you who are interested. Let's move to issue number 3. We saw some of these problems that I've outlined in issues 1 and 2 become more entrenched during COVID, but we also saw the power of collaboration and the levers that government actually hold and what can be changed with the right will and the right policies and initiatives. Let me just pick a couple of examples. So one social issue area we saw significant shifts in was around homelessness. We witnessed improvements in housing stability with moratoriums on evictions, and we saw a reduction in reduction in rough sleeping in a whole number of cities across the country, for example. We know that JobKeeper and JobSeeker were huge protective factors. Social security increases enable people to do things many of us take for granted: eat 3 meals a day, buy more nutritious food, pay debts, have warm clothing, and buy basics like toiletries. We know that unemployment was curtailed by supporting over 1.63 million workers on JobKeeper. And for our charity sector, almost 2/3 of charities who were eligible for stimulus reported that the government stimulus measures had allowed their organisation to remain operational. Number 4, COVID was enormously disruptive for the sector. And the sector played a really important role as partners in recovery that we've outlined in other reports. So partners around emergency issues in terms of supporting our most vulnerable, partners around caring for our kids, age, disability, mental health, etc. They provided social glue in areas of sport and culture and art and connections and belonging, which shifted slightly depending on where we were at with COVID. They were partners around a whole lot of environmental issues. And finally, important partners in economic recovery. 1 in 10 of our workforce are employed by the not-for-profit sector, and the not-for-profit sector accounts for 8% of our GDP. We saw huge increases in demand from across our for-purpose organisations. When we surveyed them in the pulse of the for-purpose sector survey, 71% reported an increase in demand in services. But we know that resource constraints meant that people couldn't always meet those requirements. Resourcing challenges were felt strongly across the sector. 85% reported reductions in revenue. There are issues around not receiving funding to pay what it takes to deliver services through government and other corporate and philanthropic contracts. And organisations saw major disruptions with loss in volunteer hours, disruptions around how they delivered services. And while there were huge pivots to online, only 30% reported that they had the necessary systems and software for staff to work at home when COVID kicked off. The Digital Inclusion Index demonstrates that we have challenges on that digital front on both sides. Finally, the 5th challenge that we faced across the sector, even though not-for-profits did an amazing job during and continue to do in this COVID environment, there is enormous uncertainty. We have uncertainty around the viability of the business models of charities, as our modelling has shown with SVA around small margins, operating deficits, challenges around balance sheets, different business models, etc. Job losses are lower than we predicted, but we have lost JobKeeper, and Job Seeker has gone down, which risks increase in service demands. We have challenges in this country around trust. Workforce issues continue to be pervasive, and we continue to see the ongoing need for investment in things like infrastructure, innovation, and capacity building. So I think that's enough of a quick grab bag from me, and we can hear about what this means in more detail from our colleagues at Fitted for Work, but I'm going to throw back to Cassie to introduce them.
Okay. Thanks very much, Kristy. That's a fantastic overview to start with, and we're now going to go from the 10,000-foot view down to the very up close and personal view. And I'm thrilled to introduce Marcia Scott from Fitted for Work to talk to us about her experiences with the organisation during COVID-19. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you, Cassie. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcia Scott. I'm Brazilian and Australian. I came to Australia 5 years ago and started building skills to be employed again. I had a few jobs. My first job was receptionist at Headspace, which I really enjoyed. I have a degree in business, a marketing background. I knew how to upskill and was happy with my journey until COVID hit last year. I had left my employment because I was having some interviews and I thought I could continue in that journey. To my dismay, there were no jobs available. And I was going to employment agencies asking help with my CV and asking to understand how to better speak the new language of interview techniques, the STAR method. I was very overwhelmed. I knew I had the skills, but I didn't have the confidence. I just felt, as a woman who had stayed home for 18 years with kids, I felt that I could not prove myself to the market force. I was registered as a job seeker and found out that my consultant at the job agency was looking after 120 people. She did not have time to look at me. She did not have time to look at my skills or even suggest anything that would make me more employable. So no help from the agencies, employment agencies, they didn't understand what I needed. No help from the job active because they were just looking after so many numbers. And then a social worker told me about Fitted for Work. And they said, they help women just like you. So I went there and they started by looking at my CV and they tailored the support to my needs because I didn't know about the STAR method for interviews. So I started getting help with that. And then I did something called an Emerge program. And the Emerge program are 8 modules online. And the first module opened up with something called what is our negative self-talk? Write it down. What's our positive self-talk? Write it down. And I realized that I had so much negative self-talk. And the second module was about confidence. My confidence was so low because even though I knew I had the skills, I just didn't know how to present them. So with the help of the Emerge program and the tailored help of the consultants, I started shining again, but that was not something I could get from any other services really. And if it wasn't for Fitted for Work, I know that I would not be where I am in attorney. So now I'll tell you what happened. So with that help, I continue having interviews. This is during the pandemic last year. And I started getting much better with interviews because my confidence levels were better. And so 5 weeks, but I still didn't get a job. But 5 weeks ago, the government opened up a program called to help job seekers. It's called Jobs Victoria Advocacy. So Fitted for Work put my name up for that role. And I was so much better at interviews anyway, and I was so much better at trusting myself anyway, that so 5 weeks ago, I got a job to help job seekers out there find services that can help them become employable again. So I cannot convey to you the satisfaction of instead of now being someone who is in need, I can help other people in need with the lived experience. I'm an empath, love helping people, want to work for the non-charity environment and industry, and that's my story. So I'm very, very grateful. If it wasn't for Freedom for Work, I wouldn't be successful. Totally happy with my job. Very happy to be hosted. Freedom for Work hosts me, looks after me, so I can do my job out there. So that's my experience. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And I'll pass on to Cassie, or Donna, I'm sorry, our CEO at Freedom for Work. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcia. Thanks everyone for having me here today. I thought I'd start by giving you a brief background on the Fitter for Work operation and then finish with our current position, challenges, and perhaps some of the opportunities. So at Fitter for Work, we believe that every woman is entitled to economic security, and we think one of the best ways for her to achieve that is through employment, as you've just heard from Marcia. So we do this by delivering services that get women ready for work, help them find work, and then help them stay in work and navigate their world of work. We've been doing this for 16 years, and in that time, we've managed to deliver 40,000 services to women across Australia. We've developed services that are tailored to each woman's individual needs, and will work with her wherever she's at on her journey into work, and the services are free to any woman anywhere in Australia. So we have a formula, as I said, that we've developed over the last 16 years, and it's proven. So in Australia, pre-pandemic, the face of poverty in Australia was a woman over 55. And on average, if you're a woman over 55, it will take you approximately 68 weeks or 17 months to find employment. And if you don't find work within the first 2 years, you're unlikely ever to work again. When any woman goes through the services of Fitter for Work, it's 10 weeks on average. So pre-pandemic, Fitter for Work had outgrown its national headquarters and moved to a fit for purpose site. And this allowed us to double the number of services available to women nationally and seriously grow our social enterprise. So we moved into our brand new Fit for Purpose home in 2020. And in 2020, of course, as you all know, we were experiencing drought, followed by bushfires, followed by floods, followed by the pandemic, followed by floods again. And it just seems to go on and on. Thankfully, we had already developed and were already delivering a virtual model on all of our services because we had invested in a strong IT platform. So our services were not disrupted. Now we generate our revenue in 3 ways, and it's a pretty even split. A third is through fundraising and donations. A third is generated by grants from trusts and foundation, and a third through our social enterprises. And over the last 6 years, we've been on a journey to develop our own income. In other words, we really want to practice what we preach. We can't be talking to women about the importance of economic security if we don't have it ourselves as an organisation. So we developed 3 social enterprises that now generate a third of our revenue. It's really important to note that we don't receive any recurrent government funding, federal or state, despite most of our referrals coming from government-funded agencies. Now, when the pandemic hit, we saw an immediate impact for all of our 3 revenue streams. Donations were down. We were feeling the impacts of many people giving to the bushfire recovery efforts. And also, of course, the pandemic severely limited the number of live events that we host annually to raise money. With trusts and foundations, we found certainly through the pandemic, new funding difficult to attract, as there are quite a few funders who are now working on an invite-only basis and narrowing their focus. And despite the fact that we have an excellent track record, the hardest area for us to fund is actually our core services. with many trusts and foundations looking to share the love and ensure that they spread a piece of the pie to all the various charities vying for funding. And our social enterprise has suffered also. As I mentioned, we have three. The Conscious Closet, which is a physical retail store, that could no longer operate and became an eBay store with reduced sales. Our second one is SheWorks, which is a recruitment enterprise, and that came to almost a complete standstill. And our most successful social enterprise, which is called Supervention, also produced a reduced income. So just very quickly, Supervention works as an intervention program currently with financial institutions. We work with Commonwealth Bank and also ANZ. And basically when an institution sees the first signs that a woman is experiencing financial distress and unemployment or underemployment is having an impact, they'll refer women straight through to Fitter for Work and pay for those services. And we've been running these contracts for the last 3 years, and each year those contracts have grown exponentially from a financial perspective. However, when the pandemic hit, customers did not want to talk about employment. They wanted to talk about getting their loan repayments put on hold. So we made it through the last financial year, and it was around 4 things. JobKeeper absolutely helped us, and we're very grateful for that. 2, regular income from our social enterprise contracts, as I mentioned. 3, we already had a strong IT infrastructure, so there was very little pivoting that was required. And the 4th thing was we had great governance from a committed and really courageous board. So where are we at now? Well, like most for-purpose organisations, we've always operated on the slimmest of margins, and there is very little financial buffer, and we have limited access to financial support. But despite this, we've always managed to survive and indeed thrive. And as our chair likes to remind the directors, that being on the board of Fitter for Work is not for the faint-hearted. However, I do believe that 2021 is a very different story for a number of reasons, and these are a few, but not limited to these. 1, we have this complex, unpredictable and uncertain the nature of the pandemic. Ad hoc lockdowns making it really hard for us to utilise one of our most valuable assets, our volunteers. And without them, we struggle to meet demand. The great majority of our staff are client-facing professionals. In fact, 2/3 of our expenditure is spent on those working with some of the most vulnerable in our community. And this coming financial year, without adding any additional positions, our salary expenditure is going to increase by approximately $500,000. We've got a CPI increase, we've got a superannuation guarantee increase, we've got portable long service leave levies and an ERO increase. And that's without doing anything extra. And this is all before I've mentioned the most important element in all of this, and that's our clients, the women who are struggling. It's no secret to anyone here today that the pandemic and all of the events leading up to it have disproportionately impacted women. As I said, pre-pandemic, the face of poverty in Australia was a woman over 55. And I've already talked about the length of time it takes for a woman to find work, and this has been exacerbated. So the pandemic shone a light on through all of the cracks that we have in society, and I guarantee you behind every one stand women. If you look at aged care, the majority living in aged care are women. The majority who work in aged care are women. You think about childcare, healthcare, the NFP sector, the hardest hit industries, retail, hospitality, tourism. We've seen women with increased caring responsibilities, and then we've seen the dramatic increase in domestic abuse, and the list goes on. We've heard over the last couple of weeks that the economy is bouncing back. Despite this, we know the economic impact of the pandemic is going to have a very long tail for women. Over 400,000 women have left the workforce. They have just stopped looking for work, and we don't hear about those statistics. However, with enormous challenge comes enormous opportunity, and I think the time is absolutely ripe in our industry and many other industries, and the world's hungry for change. The World Economic Forum conducted a survey in September last year, and 86% of those surveyed across 27 countries said they would prefer to see the world change significantly and become more sustainable and equitable rather than revert to the status quo. So the opportunities, I think, are here now to work with government and for government to work with us to augment, strengthen and innovate. I know at Fitter for Work we've got the capability and capacity to scale up, and we, like so many of you tuned in today, need targeted support to ensure that we continue to be here for the people who need our help the most, so that no one falls through the cracks and that we all prosper. So thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'll throw to Suzie.
Thank you so much for sharing those stories, Marcia and Donna. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay respect to the past and extend respect to the leaders of today and those who are emerging. And a quick opportunity to say, if you haven't checked out the Uluru Statement from the Heart, please do, and encourage you to accept the invitation in that to walk together towards a brighter future. Marcia, thanks so much for sharing your personal story of transformation. I was just really uplifted to hear how you've landed on your feet, but it breaks my heart that luck plays such a strong role in your story. And you think about how many people don't have the good luck to end up in a Fitted for Work program or equivalent and get stuck in that system that Donna told us means on average people take 17 months to find work. And Donna, thank you so much for being so open about the situation for Fitted for Work. It's a really familiar bind that you described: increasing demand from clients and increasing cost of doing business without necessarily a funding environment where the sources of revenue are able to pay what it takes to achieve outcomes. We know that Australia relies on our charities, and there's a really clear case for government support for resilience and productivity for the charity sector. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think could be done about the situation that you've heard about today. We know Australian governments recognise they have a special role to play in targeted support for industries where there is a really clear public benefit or there's market failure. They do it all the time, including pre-pandemic. And that charities face unique constraints and barriers because of the structures that they're in, because of the environments that they operate in. And this includes things like lack of access to capital and flexible funding, market dynamics that constrain innovation, the ideas are there, and the very nature of charities being there for public benefit. And so given the economic and the social benefits that we all derive from charities, we think that targeted investments from governments in the resilience of the sector is a real win-win. So I'm going to share just a summary of the recommendations that we've made in our report. I encourage you to dig into these a little bit more by reading the report. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory. On the first piece about targeted support for charities, we commend the federal government for extending JobKeeper to charities and for changing the threshold to make it more applicable for charities' financial situations. Sadly, though, we haven't seen that thinking apply to the post-JobKeeper supports. There were in the Commonwealth budget many announcements that apply to for-profit businesses that don't apply to the not-for-profit sector because, for example, we don't pay tax, and so tax write-offs aren't helpful incentives to encouraging change. Charities employ 1 in 10 people in workforce, and they've really been left out of that post-JobKeeper support. I'll share with you a little bit more about the Resilient Charities Fund, but what we heard from Marcia is one of the impacts in that bottom row on this slide of very low rates of income support for people on job seeker or equivalent income support packages. And if we were to increase that to a meaningful level where people can live with dignity and pay for the things that they need to pay for in their lives, that would make it better for the individuals, but also really reduce demand for charities who are providing crisis services. So we're pleased that there was an increase, but disappointed that it was such a small permanent increase after the end of the coronavirus supplement. SVA has done some work with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence and the Australian National University looking at what the potential impact of that will be and expecting to see that child poverty rates in single parent families will soar in Australia to 41% as a result of this new income support payment. That's more than double the rate that they were at the peak of the COVID-19 crisis last year, and much higher than pre-pandemic levels as well. So a little bit about the Resilient Charities Fund, and then we're going to go to questions. We've put a lot of work into thinking about what makes charities unique and what challenges do they face, and therefore how would we best support them. Charities find it difficult to bring together funds, not because they are not clever, but because of the constraints that they face because of their insurance needs. And so you'll see on the left what some of those challenges are. And on the right, what are we proposing is a one-off time-limited fund that would provide both cash and capability building to eligible charities to help support their transformation and resilience, so that charities can play a key role in being partners in recovery. And for those who are very familiar with the not-for-profit sector, hopefully the right-hand side of this slide really rings a bell about, yes, these are the things that would make a big difference in our ability to achieve outcomes, and they take real time, energy and money in order to be able to develop them. So I'll leave it there. Happy to answer questions about anything that you've just seen, and you'll see the very QR code. If you camera up your phone, it'll send you a link to the report. So now, hopefully, adding questions to the chat, and I will be handing now back to Cassie to kick off our panel with Q&A.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Suzie. And I'm starting to see some questions come through in the chat, which is fantastic. But I would also like to ask all of you a question, and I'd encourage you to put some answers in the chat, or you can also, we'll pop some contact details in the chat as well if you have ideas after the session's finished. And that is, what do you want to know about the future of the charity sector? And the context for that is that we are now thinking about, this is our 4th report, we are now thinking about what a 5th and 6th and 7th report might look like. Looking at the financial viability and resilience of charities. So if you have things you want to know about, or you're sitting on some fantastic data that you'd like, that you would be prepared to let us use, we'd be delighted to hear about it. So please, I'd encourage you as we go, post your questions for the panel in the chat, but also please post your, let us know what your thoughts are and your answers to that question. As we get the questions coming through, I'm going to kick off by posing a question to the whole panel. Kristy, I'm going to dob you in to answer first, but we'll then sort of go around the grounds. And that's something that was picked up by a couple of our speakers already, but there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that this pandemic and the government response was particularly challenging for women, and that there was a really gendered aspect to what we've seen play out over the last 18 months. And I wondered if you had any thoughts you wanted to share about that.
Thanks, Cassie. And I think Donna gave some great examples of this and included some really good statistics. I mean, women were really hit, and I think actually the Grattan report called it the 3 double whammy, or 3 triple, must have been called triple. I'd have to bring up their piece to give you the exact language. But women have been hit, and Donna gave us the statistics around the employment issue. So we know there are big employment problems for women during the pandemic. So we have seen a whole lot of hidden unemployment where women have fallen out of the participation rate since, and you can see that in some of the ABS stats when you start to drill down. So there's those big issues. We also have the issue during COVID when people started to lose their jobs. Women are disproportionately in casualised jobs, low-paying jobs. We know they're disproportionately high in the not-for-profit sector, and that is a big issue, particularly in the care space where wages are low and roles are more precarious. So there's big issues around the employment side of things. They also face really big issues in terms of the unpaid work that women do. We saw women take a disproportionate share, as they do normally, but to much greater extent during COVID with things like home schooling, and the other types of care requirements that kicked in as a result of COVID. And then, of course, if you don't have, permanent work, you're not then able to pick up some of the government subsidies like JobKeeper etc. So there are certain rules that also meant that the policies didn't necessarily fit women. There's probably a whole barrage. I could talk for the next 20 minutes about this, but let me pass to Suzie or one of my other panelists who can pick up some other ideas.
Thanks, Kristy. I've been thinking a lot about which industries get special targeted support. And we looked at the gender splits of men and women in the 10 largest employing industries in Australia. These are the ones that are disproportionately employing men: construction, manufacturing, transport, postal, and warehousing. And then these are the two that disproportionately employ women: healthcare and social assistance, and education and training. And if you think about where traditionally we think about economic stimulus, it's very much in the sectors that employ men. And we haven't seen yet an adequate response from governments in investing in the industries and in the workforce conditions that will benefit women as employees in those sectors, and often benefit women as clients and beneficiaries of those industries as well. So there's a lot more work to be done. I think many a politician and bureaucrat is on notice that they have to do a better job about taking a gender lens to policy and to budgeting, but there's much room for improvement.
Donna, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Just to agree with both Kristy and Suzie, I think that we are in a really unique time in our history with lots of issues around gender inequities coming to the fore, and we have a real opportunity to innovate. And I think that what the pandemic has done is it has forced a lot of, for want of a better word, overused word, but it's forced a lot of industries to pivot, including our own sector. But I think with that comes a lot of opportunity for women to move into, for example, digital technologies and so on. But we need to start thinking about the pathways to open up those industries to women. Women don't have 3 years to go back to university full time, but what are the micro credentials that we can start, women can start building to start working towards new careers in new industries? And I think there is a lot of opportunity there.
Thanks very much, Donna. And as Kristy said, I think this is one we could all talk about for a while. I think, you know, the fact that charities employ more people than the mining and manufacturing sectors combined says a lot about how our public discourse works. I'm going to go to some, we're getting some questions coming through now, so I'm going to go to a couple of those. Pooja Lal has asked us, what has been the success or the outcome of large corporate enterprises that have charity partners? Have they been able to raise funds or get other support through the pandemic? Is there someone on the panel who particularly wants to jump in on that? Otherwise, I'll drop one of you in.
I can speak from a...
Oh, Donna, you go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can speak from our perspective. I don't think, much like our clients, I don't think we want to go cap in hand for a check every year to a corporate or government for that matter. I think there can be a really great exchange of services, just like we've seen with our supervention model with large financial institutions, and we can take that model now out to health services, we can take it out to you know, all sorts of other industries. So I think there's a real benefit in the social procurement side of things and the development of social enterprise. And I don't think that's what corporates want to do either. They don't want to hand over a check. There's got to be a fair exchange, and where that happens, I think there's a beautiful relationship that develops, and it's win-win for everyone.
I'm going to jump in on that one. We'd love to know better. Well, we'd love to have access to better data about what's really happened with corporate giving and the not-for-profit sector and charities. What we do know is that corporates are very, very good at responding to crises in Australia. And so the level of donations in cash and in kind, especially in response to droughts and then bushfires and then floods, was very, very high. We're challenged, though, in that when Kristy described right up front, the charity sector is not just there to pick up the pieces when people are in crisis. We also want to strengthen, if you like, the fences at the top of the cliff rather than picking things up at the bottom of the cliff. And there is a much murkier picture about the extent to which those partnerships have thrived or been really challenged by multiple crises.
I think on that note that Susie's just describing, our hypothesis is that there's been great inequities in donations. We know some of that data is around already in terms of some charities have fared well, if you like, during some of these crisis points, while others have not necessarily done so well. And what we really need and want to do is and I hope there is some good ideas in the chat about our next report. So one of the things that we would love to be able to do going forward is to analyse the latest ACNC data so that we can have a good understanding of which charities did well, which didn't, under what circumstances, and we can start to answer some of those questions like, did corporate giving increase or decrease, and for who, and under what circumstances, and start to play out some more of the case studies like the one we've heard from Fitted for Work, so we get a better understanding what's happened for the sector, and we can then start using that data to advocate change going forward.
Fantastic, thanks everyone. The next question I've got for you is from Sam. Suzie, I'm going to throw this one to you first, and then if others want to jump in. How do you get the benefits of scale, partnerships and consolidation in the charities sector without losing the specialisms, place relevance and community connection that the for-purpose sector brings?
Oh, tricky one. Has anyone read that story called Goldilocks? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Because my answer is certainly that there's a balance. It's oversimplifying things, as your question indicates, Sam, to say we just need for a whole lot of partnering and consolidation in the charity sector to happen, and then they'll all be more efficient and effective and job done. The factors at play for organisations like Fitted for Work and many others are so much more complex than that. We know, and your question understands, that often you need a really local tailored response that understands exactly what's going on the ground for people in place, in time, and that's the best way to deliver great outcomes and to strengthen connections. However, we do know that there are lots of charities who would like to collaborate, who would like to partner up and might see the benefits of greater scale. And one of the big barriers to doing that is that takes real-time resources and money in order to be able to achieve that. And so the idea of having in the Resilient Charities Fund and a theme around consolidation and partnering is not because we think all charities should consolidate into larger entities, but because for those who do want to, and there would be material benefit in achieving the purpose of that charity, they need money and they need expertise to be able to do that.
Thanks, Suzie. Kristy or Donna, did either of you want to add anything there?
I just reinforce Susie's point around, we have seen about the importance of local and, the importance of community organisations and civil society in local areas. We saw that really, I guess, elevate during COVID, and also with things like, regional challenges in terms of bushfires and drought, etc. So I just reinforce that is really important. And we have also seen some significant, sorry, my dogs are, someone's at the door. Of course they're at the door, it's a webinar. We've also seen the damage that things like market-driven changes have done where we've lost niche providers, and I think that's got real issues for civil society. So we must, in moving forward and thinking about how partnerships might work and how we ensure we support a vibrant charity sector going forward, we really can't afford to lose some of those smaller providers. And remember, in the scheme of it, out of those 57,000 charities, 2 in 3 are tiny. So we have a lot of very local civil society charities across this country.
I'd also throw in there that this goes back to something Donna was talking about earlier about the challenges in getting people to fund overhead. that we, you know, I would love us to never use the word again, but it's unfortunately the word we use to say that, you know, having, as Donna was telling us, having strong IT systems is critical, but it's not easy to get anybody to fund that. And we've actually got a separate piece of work going on with SVA, CSI and a couple of other organisations looking at this question of how can we better understand and ultimately fund the full cost of services. So, and yes, I just see a comment in the chat about what you define as overhead. And yes, we are very much, we are interested in that one and sort of welcome any thoughts or input people have on that.
See, I don't know if you're about to throw to another question, but just one of the stats, we are doing more work on that, you know, that work around pay what it takes, so that actually, and we will describe what we mean by indirect costs, but the overheads are basically all the costs that go beyond just directly providing a particular service. If that's what you might do, for example. And interestingly, in our Pulse of the For-Purpose sector, first wave of survey, we had over 500 respondents. And please, we're desperate for more respondents for wave 2. So if you haven't filled it out yet, please fill it out. Somebody will throw the link in the chat. But saying that, one of the interesting stats that came out of wave 1 was that of the respondents, only we had, and I'm reading the stats so I get this right, 40% of government and 40% of philanthropic funding received. People reported they were cross-subsidising that because the grants didn't cover either the direct cost, how much it actually costs to provide that service, or the indirect. And that doesn't cover the other indirect costs that people face, like rents and those kinds of overheads. So this is a really challenging space and something that we know we need to better understand and work out how we get philanthropy, governments, corporates, any of our funders to actually meet the real costs.
And I'm certainly
Kristy,
seeing.
I'm going to jump in on that one too, because I think, you know, it's the cumulative effect of many charities leaning in to respond to so many crises, the bushfires, the droughts, the floods, the health impact of COVID, the economic impact of COVID, needing to have your staff safely working remotely, needing to pivot your social enterprises so that they can remain trading in some form. You know, all of those things have slowly chewed up what little reserves charities have. And so when we see the continuation of funding sources not covering the full cost of what it actually takes to deliver great outcomes, it's sending charities closer and closer to the edge, which is why you need to have, you know, a still resolve to be on the board of a charity, as Donna said.
And we're seeing lots of questions and comments in the chat about things like low salaries in the charity sector, about burnout, which we know has been a massive issue in many parts of the sector. And that's all part of this discussion too about, you know, what one person calls overhead might be, you know, making sure everybody has a sustainable workload by making sure, you know, you've got the appropriate admin support, for example. So there is a lot there, and I think that's all part of that bigger question. I've got a question here that I'm going to throw to Kristy in the first instance. A question from Neve. Is there anything you can tell us about creating the preconditions for change? How can we start to organise ourselves? What can we start to measure and monitor in preparation for positive and progressive change?
Wow, Neve, hitting the easy questions. I probably need to have a think about the answers to that. I mean, there's a number of things we can start to look at. I mean, it depends on where we set benchmarks and for which bits. So there are things we can look at around financial kind of performance and what that kind of looks like. And some of the kind of metrics that we use in our reports in looking at that are things like the margins, the difference between, you know, where you land on your P&L and how much you've got in operating surplus, etc. So there's a whole lot of financial type things. There are things around and there are things within that, like the, you know, overheads and where there are gaps. There are things that we can look at in terms of the infrastructure that organisations need to be effective and what proportion of funding might go into innovation and whether there is progress being made in that way. There are various metrics we can look at around, obviously, performance in terms of for what purpose you exist and the outcomes that you might be seeking to achieve for that. CSI, we've been working for a number of years on a platform we're going to launch later this year called Amplify Social Impact, which has a collection of 400 indicators that have already been validated that charities don't need to have a researcher on tap. You can type in your purpose and it will give you suggested outcomes that you might want to track. It will pre-populate a survey for the people that you work with. It's super cool and it's coming. So there are various things that we can look at around, how are we doing on our financials? How are we doing on our workforce issues? How are we doing on our the purpose for which we exist front? And, there are many others around that. Suzie, I know SBA do a lot of work in this space. Did you want to add some ideas?
I was so impressed with the level of collaboration in the charity sector as COVID hit. People started getting together to try and make the case collectively. And I think we saw that work very effectively. For example, with the end of JobKeeper being pushed out from what was originally the end of September and creating a ramp rather than a cliff, changing thresholds, etc. That can work really well. So I've put in a plug for some of the organisations I know of, but there are many, and some of them will be sector specific who do some of that advocacy work. And then amplifying stories of real people. Marcia, thank you so much for telling your story and being so open about it, because ultimately it's humans who we need to convince, and having real stories can be such a good complement to the data and the numbers and the analysis. And so elevating those is really important as well in creating the conditions for change. And then elect politicians who are going to do something about it. That's my one plug.
Yeah, and certainly in the context of the work we're thinking about, when we're thinking about what comes next, we are also thinking about, the fact that we're going to have an election in the next 12 months, and how do we make sure that charities are appropriately recognised for their role in this in being partners in recovery. We're nearly at time, so I'm going to wrap up the Q&A there, but and I apologise to those people we didn't get to, but hopefully we've at least touched on some of the questions. We will certainly take them all away and have a think about what feeds into our next report. What we will post in the link in the chat in a moment is a link where you can sign up to be sent our next reports when they come out. We anticipate there'll be at least one later this year, but as I say, we genuinely are working out at the moment what is going to be most useful for the sector, and there's some fantastic ideas coming through, and I really appreciate that. And we'll probably be in touch with some of you to pick your brains further. I'm also going to echo Kristy's plug for please go and fill out the Pulse of the For Purpose sector survey. I know we all have absurd amounts of survey fatigue after the last 18 months or so, but we literally cannot do this work without the data. Like, unless we have it, we're just, making things up as we go along, and that's ultimately not helpful to anybody. So I would ask you to please go and fill that out, and fill out the other surveys that come out, because as I say, I know it's not fun, but it makes it's what makes this work possible. And we are delighted to hear from you. As Susie's just said in the chat, it is lovely to see some very familiar faces and names on this call, and we know that many of you are doing amazing work in your communities. We've obviously had the good fortune to be able to hear from Fitted for Work today and hear about the amazing work they do. They are one of many, many charities doing great work, and we're always excited to hear those stories. But we would encourage you certainly to go and have a look at the reports that we're talking about, sign up to receive the new ones, fill in the survey, and please, we'll send around a recording. So please share the webinar when it comes out. Before we wind up, I would like to thank all the behind the scenes folks who have made this happen. If I name people, I'll miss someone. So, but I'm going to give it a go. So Rhonda, Nicola, George, Anna, Patrick, I'm sure I've missed someone, and you know that'll end up badly. Beck from Fit for Work as well. So thank you all, because we can't do this. We can't do this without you, and we look forward to hearing from you and being able to share our work in the future with you. So thank you very much for coming along today.